Well, buildings too, like archives, and any society that has a program for the preserving of buildings should take into consideration all aspects of life. What means something to a community, what means something to a society at large. Churches in various communities are often very, very important to the people who lived in the communities, grew up, and worshipped in the churches, and far more churches are preserved, I think, than any other kind of structure. But let's consider all aspects of life. If we want to reflect the history of Alberta in its important buildings at the provincial level, they can be designated, and they should be advocated to be designated if they reflect a social theme or an event or are directly associated with an important person in the province's history. So, for example, Peter Lougheed's house in Calgary should be preserved because it's directly associated with Peter Lougheed. The building we're in right now, Old St. Stephen's College, is the oldest building on the university campus and reflected all kinds of service over the years, a military purpose. When soldiers stayed here during World War II, it was a Methodist college. It's now a center for Alberta culture. All these things come together to warrant its preserving permanently. But then other buildings too. A community may denigrate a little old shack that's just off Main Street and want to tear it down, but then, just a minute now, that little old shack back in the 1950s, that housed the community's Chinese laundry. Chinese laundry functioned in that building. Well, that's an aspect of life in Western Canada that we have very, very few representatives of. So it would be a good idea, not across the board to preserve them all, but to have at least one building in Alberta preserved that represented that kind of activity. There's a pool hall in Vilna that's been designated a provincial level historic site. And that is because it has all the elements of a 1950s pool hall. The table, the cue balls, and the calendars on the wall, and everything is there. Same way with the Sexsmith blacksmith shop. Nels Johnson operated that from the 30s up into the 60s. When he left all his equipment, all his blacksmithing paraphernalia, from the forge to the hammers to the horseshoes on the wall, and that is preserved permanently, not only because it was a blacksmith, because all the artifacts were there. And it reflected an aspect of life which, during the 1950s, people would not probably appreciate. Across the street from the blacksmith shop is the Frontier Lumber Yard in Sexsmith. That is about to be designated a provincial historic site. Communities don't like their lumber yards, but there's a very important aspect of small town business activity in rural Alberta that should be preserved on a representative basis. So, what reflects everyday life in Alberta, we should preserve representatives of them, dwellings, town halls, whatever, and then also those buildings that did play an important role in the history of the province as a whole. Alberta does stand as exemplary in Canada for the number of buildings it has designated and is preserving.